When Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated released in June, it's no surprise that people started to speedrun it on day one of its release. Dozens upon dozens of tricks were already being found, such as sponge warping, infinite lasso gliding, and vertical bowl boosting. But some of these tricks were only possible under specific conditions. These differences eventually led to the entire PC leaderboards being wiped clean. This would prove to be very divisive among the community, with many people understandably upset that their runs have been invalidated. With all the complexities of the situation, it's best to start from the very beginning. Before we get started, I want to remind you guys that I stream speedruns on Twitch. Come drop a follow if you're interested and come say hi. The link is in the description below. To lay the groundwork, it's important to understand just how different PC speedrunning is from console speedrunning. PCs are not standardized. I would be playing on a brand new computer while you decide to do runs on your old HP from 2012. This isn't the cause for console speedrunning. While load times may differ between different versions, the variance between individual consoles is greatly reduced. In addition, PC speedruns generally aren't timed using start-to-finish timing. They instead use load removers in an effort to reduce the advantage someone may have from being able to load faster. While console speedruns are usually pretty clear-cut with their rules, this isn't really the case for PC speedruns. On the first day of the game's release, the speedrun leaderboards were opened up and runs started getting verified. This itself was a questionable decision, as both the mods and the community were well aware that the rules would need to be adapted over time to fit Rehydrated as a speedrun. While it was originally intended for the boards to remain closed upon launch, possibly for several weeks, outcry from members of the community led to submissions being opened. It would soon be found out that the game's maximum frame rate is 146 frames per second. A frame rate this high causes vertical bowl boosting and sponge warping to work extremely effectively, whereas on 60 frames, the tricks are severely hindered. As a result, some instances of these tricks were not possible to perform at 60 frames per second. These differences were acknowledged, but the big implications wouldn't be realized until later. With this knowledge though, a rule was made which required one's frame rate to be shown in the video capture. Subsequently, a variable was added to the leaderboards to reflect whether a run was captured at 60 or 146 FPS. As the situation developed, more problems began to arise. It turns out that some computers, specifically those with AMD hardware, were completely incapable of reaching 146 frames per second no matter what. Additionally, despite the game being released in 2020, the developers made the curious decision to tie the physics directly to the frame rate. This meant that not only would speedrun tech be influenced, but completely normal gameplay mechanics would be influenced by frame rate too. At this point, murmurs began popping up around the community. Some people thought the rule should cap the frame rate at 60 so that it was fair to all runners. After all, even though most people were able to run the game above 60, few people were able to consistently run the game at a full 146 frames per second. To not enforce a cap would in essence make the speedrun a pay-to-win. Those who would have the newest and most expensive PCs would be able to run the game with the highest frame rate and the most consistent physics. This led to many believing that the top times in the game would be gatekept by a fat pocketbook and a high-end graphics card. In response, a separate crowd began to develop who believed that the game's rules should remain as is, without a frame rate cap. Not only would it make the rule set increasingly Byzantine and arbitrary, it also removed many of the tricks runners found to be the most fun and viewers saw as most entertaining. This would severely stunt the long-term viability as well as the accessibility of Rehydrated as a speedrun. After all, the checklist required to submit a run on PC was growing by the day. If the game was capped, it would now require to use a load remover, one's frame rate on display, the ability to record gameplay, and the runner would have to go into the game's files to manually change the cap to 60 frames. And with all the tricks which were being lost, many questioned if it was even worth the effort to jump through all these hoops. This led to a firestorm within the community. Both sides debated fiercely, with many threatening to quit running the game altogether unless their rule set was picked. With emotions running high, it was necessary for the board mods to think carefully about the decision before they made it. Hours upon hours were poured into finding a way to uncap the frame rate on AMD cards, but all of these attempts proved unsuccessful. Talks were had about making a community patch, which untied the frame rate from the physics. This would allow everyone's game to function the same regardless of their frame rate. While this seemed reasonable at a glance, it raised problems of its own, namely still being arbitrary, time of development for the mod, and possibility of opening up Pandora's box by allowing modded files in speedruns. After much deliberation though, a decision was finally reached. The game was to be capped at 60 frames per second. With this decision made, it is now time to figure out what to do with the boards. Would the old runs be grandfathered in? Would only runs capped at 60 FPS be allowed to stay? Or would the entire boards need to be purged? Many members feared that if the old runs were allowed to stay on the boards, the world record would forever be unbeatable, as there would be no way to replace the old tricks lost. The moderators had to figure out what to do with the already verified uncapped runs. Either every uncapped run would have to be manually removed, or every 60 FPS run would have to be manually moved to a new board. While this may just sound like a woe is me moment for the board mods, the amount of work was truly overbearing. By this point, hundreds of runs had already been submitted. This would mean that hundreds of runs would also need to be manually sorted through. Considering how notoriously bad speedrun.com servers are, this job could have taken dozens of hours to complete. In the end, the decision was made to completely wipe the PC boards. Everyone who did a run at 60 FPS would need to resubmit their runs, while everyone who played at uncapped would need to adjust to the new rule set. Now that a month has passed, it's fair to look back and ponder whether the correct decision was made or not. In my opinion, I still agree with the choice to cap the game at 60 FPS. The game is fairer now, allowing a greater number of runners to come and compete for top times. At the same time, the decision is not without its drawbacks. The momentum Rehydrated had was truly incredible. At the time the boards were purged, over 400 runners had submitted runs. The number of active runners was on pace to surpass Super Mario 64 for the most active speed game any day. Not only would this have been an incredible feat, it would have been an important one as well. It would have shown the true reach of the BFBB speedrun community, growing a long way to legitimize it as a speed game rather than just a meme run. By purging these runs from the boards, these runs would no longer be counted towards the active runners or total runners. Additionally, the runner total has never recovered. At the time of this video, Rehydrated had just crossed 200 total runners. Had the boards not been purged, it's not unreasonable to think that Rehydrated could have 500 plus runners, making it one of the most popular speedruns of all time. Despite all this, the right decision was made. Instead of prioritizing short-term glory at the risk of the game's long-term viability, we chose to build off a foundation which will promote Rehydrated's speedrunning scene for years to come. While Rehydrated may never hit those lofty numbers again, it was a sacrifice which needed to be made. And that wraps things up. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you want to catch my future videos. I'll be making more content like this in the near future. My name's JBHJ, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.